who, do I say that correctly? Postma?
Postma. That is very correct. Postma.
And Dr. Postma is a very distinguished professor of pharmacoeconomics at the University of Groningen. Did I get that correct? You have to have a lot of phlegm in your throat to get that correct. So at the University of Groningen, and he has many degrees and distinctions. He is the chair of something at the University of Groningen. I'm going to let him actually give all the details. He's the advisor to the World Health Organization and many other groups. But I'll let you give in the details, and thank you very much for coming, and we're honored to have you. Dr.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't send you my CV, Murray, then you would have been fully prepared. Well, I will introduce myself a little bit more, and I want to say that the honor is all mine to be invited, and yeah, I enjoy the opportunity to give this talk. I will try to explain you a little bit how the situation in the Netherlands is. As the title says, I will focus on vaccines today. It's not that my unit only does vaccines, but historically it has been my interest. Previously, I was working at the National Institute of Public Health, and they do a lot in vaccines. But I know next week some of my colleagues will be here as well, and they will talk more about cardiovascular disease, oncology, other areas. But I'm from the unit of pharmacoepidemiology and pharmacoeconomics, which is abbreviated to PE2, pharmacoeco economics. And you, of course, might be aware that Petros Pechlivanovou here and in the back, Hong An T. I hope I spell your name right. Hong An, it's always so difficult. Are two former PhDs of mine. In the unit, we have two chairs, of course, epidemiology and economics. We have a group like 6 staff, 6 postdocs, 30 PhDs. And the nice thing is that we are in between the university hospital with our group and the Faculty of Natural Sciences. So formally, the Department of Pharmacy is in the Faculty of Natural Sciences, but informally, the vast majority of our research is actually with the hospital. So we always get the complaints from the Faculty of Natural Sciences. Why don't you collaborate more with us? You belong to our faculty, and the hospital complains you collaborate so much with us. Why don't you join the hospital as a group? We have many nationalities. The day before yesterday, we had a thesis defense from Lithuania, so the Baltic states. People from the Balkan, Greek, Serbian, Macedonian, Southeast Asia, Hong An from Vietnam, also many Indonesian students, PhD students, German, Belgium, of course, being the next door neighbors, a project in Zimbabwe on blood transfusion with 2 PhDs. The group, myself, and it looks a bit sad actually, former member of the Health Council, former member of WHO Quiver Group, former member of the Dutch NICE, so maybe I peaked too early, I don't know. But generally these committees have like a maximum of 8 years. So I don't think I really misbehaved in any of these groups, but after 8 years you're basically kicked out because they want new blood in the group. So I do have my contacts, of course, a huge network, but I'm officially not in this Dutch NICE, for example. My background is econometrics, so the Dutch NICE in particular was very useful for me to start understanding a little bit about pharmacy. As an econometrician, I've seen it with Petros as well in the beginning. Drugs are difficult to understand, but you have to learn this doing while being on the job, and the Dutch NICE was very important. What do I still do? I'm still the unit head of this PE2. I'm actually also, as I said here, director of the graduate school that overlaps, or research institute that overlaps both the university and the Faculty of Natural Sciences. So actually enough to do. I'm also in the board of pharmacy, and that's how it goes. Yeah, I don't do the board myself. So some of the topics, I said vaccines is only one. Next week, some of my colleagues will be here, and they will, some of you will discuss with them, and they will tell you more about other topics like the pharmacy research database that we have, with which it's 500,000 Dutch people included. We have all the prescription data. Sometimes Petros Petlifanoglu, for example, linked these data in the past to other databases. We do drug utilization studies, epidemiological studies with proxies, because we don't have diagnoses in this prescription database. So, for example, diabetes drugs is a nice proxy, of course, for having diabetes. Pharmaceutical care interventions, osteoporosis is a topic there. Job van Boven will be here next week. Pharmacoepidemiology, the chair is Eelco Hak. Infectious diseases epidemiology is an interest. Case control studies in perinatal epidemiology, so things surrounding pregnancy has always been a topic in our unit. And I forgot to type the last, yesterday evening to type the last topic here. It should read something like combining, what were we combining here? No, you can get your picture. We always combine a lot of things. Okay, then number 3, pharmacoeconomics. Cardiology, nephrology, blood transfusion, thrombosis, hematology, so everything has to do with blood is an interest. And finally, infectious diseases and vaccines, which will be the topic of today. I hope to explain a little bit to you how does it work in the Netherlands with reimbursement of these vaccines, what is the role of pharmacoeconomics, and what are the peculiarities of the Dutch system. So an overview of what I want to tell in the coming 40 minutes, so that we have some time left for discussion as well. I will say a little bit about how it works in the Netherlands, a little bit about thresholds, for example. Do we have a threshold? What is our threshold for cost effectiveness? We have our guidelines. Some are very peculiar, like the one on discounting. How does it work with modeling? You might be aware that modeling infectious diseases is a specific area. We have so examples, meningococcal C, HPV, and some more. You will see them coming by. Another slide where Petros would say a typical Postma slide, although I have to acknowledge my colleague Kees Tolly for this, who once sent it to me. Cost effectiveness as the fourth hurdle, and it is indeed becoming more and more really the fourth hurdle in a country like the Netherlands. So I mean, you see many countries, Germany for example, a neighbor country, where they do quite some cost effectiveness analysis, but actually it's more from scientific interest, and it never has any impact there on the real decision making. In the Netherlands we have, actually, it started all with this. This was the early 2000s with this paper by Robert Welte, and I just summarize here briefly that, showing that we used a very simple decision model back then. The question was about vaccination against meningococcal C infections, and this was actually the first time that people I was just new in the committee, and it's already in this vaccine committee from the beginning, many people would say, okay, the vaccine works and this and this and this, but in the end, it is all about the cost effectiveness. So they were all looking expectantly at me to tell them what is the cost effectiveness and should we do this type of vaccination, yes or no. And so more illustrations of it, and in particular, these are actually all illustrations about vaccines where the fourth hurdle, really, the cost effectiveness was really decisive. For example, we introduced human papillomavirus vaccination around 4 or 5 years ago. And the question was, should we do, we introduced it for 12-year-olds, as many countries, maybe also here in Canada. The question was, should we do a catch-up program? So what about the 13-year-olds and the 14-year-olds, etc.? And then the calculations being done were exactly what is cost effectiveness for 13-year-olds, what is cost effectiveness of 14-year-olds, etc. And then at the age of 16, turning to 17, it turned from being cost effective to not being cost effective. Whatever our cost effectiveness threshold might be, I will say a little bit more about that in a second. But it was then decided, okay, 17 and 18-year-old girls who are still not adults, still children, would not get the HPV vaccine because it was not cost effective. So that's one example where you see how, yeah, that it was really, that I'm proud, of course, I have to be proud of that, that my science really was decisive in decision making. You also see from hepatitis B, for example, in conjugate pneumococcal vaccination, that we, for vaccines, we do re-analyses. Actually, for drugs, we don't do them, but for vaccines, you see, hepatitis B, 2000, we did an analysis, not cost effective, and then in 2008, it was cost effective. And for pneumococcal vaccinations, we even did it 3 times. So a new type of vaccine comes on the market, and we immediately, there is the issue of recalculating these kind of things. Likely the same discussions have been in Canada. Some of the issues that I want to raise, general, always, how do we interpret the cost effectiveness ratio? What types of costs do we include? Do we take a broader societal perspective? What about production losses? What about maybe qualities of carers and these kind of issues? Important for vaccines, but of course, in general, important. More specific for vaccines, evidence-based medicine is the religion, let's say, of today for some. And for vaccines, generally, you don't have this hard evidence. It's generally evidence on immunologic parameters and not on hard endpoints. Discounting hits very hard on vaccines because it's preventive. HPV vaccination prevents cancer in, let's say, 40 years. So 40 years is far away. So it hits, the discounting hits very hard there. And of course, the type of model to use. And actually, the lower part of the slide, my colleague Philip Beutels, who is actually in Antwerp, he summarized these issues very nicely. And I was actually last week with Philip together at the Robert Koch Institute in Germany, where we were advising the Germans on how to deal with vaccines and cost effectiveness of vaccines. And so there is. We discussed this yesterday evening during dinner. That there is a group in the world of maybe 10, maybe I said 20, maybe it's more like 10, 15 people who you meet every time at WHO and who do a lot of this type of work in vaccines. Now, so far I discussed vaccines, and we should also realize that basically the origin, and the RP here means reference pricing, so I mean here the reference pricing system. It's basically the origin in the Netherlands of the 4th hurdle, let's say. Since 2005, cost effectiveness plays an important role in the reimbursement of new innovative drugs in the Netherlands. So think of diabetes drugs, psychotropic, hematological, and some vaccines have been evaluated as well by this Dutch NICE. Basically, then the Dutch NICE comes in, and they are the ones who look at the drugs, not so much the vaccines. Although sometimes vaccines are not in the national immunization program, as I state here, and then the Dutch NICE comes in and thinks maybe healthcare insurance should finance this vaccine rather than the national program. So the Dutch NICE is basically the CVZ, the Dutch Foundation for Healthcare Insurance. Actually changed his name two months ago into Zorginstituut Nederland, sorry for the Dutch, which would be like Care Institute Netherlands. And what they would say, and the ministry would say, I mentioned thresholds before, and I don't know how it is in Canada, but the ministry certainly, and this is often the case if the Minister of Health is from a religious party, would always say, no, we don't put a price tag on human life. We would never say human life is 20,000, 80,000. So the official standpoint is no threshold in the Netherlands. There have been some reports. Once there was an analysis of statins, 20,000 per quali. Once there was an analysis of another institute who came up with a relatively high 80,000 per quali threshold. But basically, if we look at the Dutch NICE in the reference pricing system, the evaluation of dossiers from the industry is based on the guidelines. So, and we had this also already briefly discussed yesterday evening when I was in the committee, and you might be aware of the cost effectiveness plane, and we have this infamous fourth quadrant where new drugs are worse and more expensive. If the analysis, and this was once the case, if the analysis of the economics adheres to the 11 guidelines that we have in the Netherlands, it would get a positive stamp. So we have had this once, fourth quadrant, cost effectiveness was okay. So there's no threshold, so we are fully dependent on the methodological issues to assess such a dossier. Of course, when there is no threshold, there is room for researchers to shout some things, and the British Medical Journal likes these kind of things. So when we published our data on the pneumococcal vaccines, PCV7, PCV10, and PCV13 are the 3 pneumococcal vaccines. When we published this, actually initially we sent the BMJ this graph with two thresholds. The one I mentioned on 80,000 and the one I mentioned on 40,000. And then the British Medical Journal came back to us and said, you Dutch people, you have to make up your mind. Here in the UK, we have a very clear threshold of 30,000 pounds. So what about you? You cannot have 2 thresholds. And of course, when you are so close to, as one of the referees comments, I don't know, maybe it was Jeff, I don't know. But then, of course, when you're so close to a publication, you are very willing to do 80,000 plus 20 divided by 2. And so we advocate. So now we advocate. Actually, we advocate now a sort of a system where we would say up to 20,000 it is cost effective. Between 20 and 50, it is likely cost effective. Between 50 and 80, it is unlikely but still possible cost effective. And above 80, it is not cost effective anymore. And that's generally now how we publish our results. This is Belgium. Sorry for the Dutch. The Belgians also speak. Part of them speak Dutch, as you know. And actually, I think the northern part should actually. Why isn't it a part of the Netherlands? I don't know. But you see, 50,000 euros per quali is not so strange. The Belgians basically have 50,000 euros per quali as their cutoff point. And this was a report for rotavirus of their Belgian NICE. So far about how do we interpret the cost effectiveness ratio and a paper that we published on our system that I said 20,000, 50,000, 80,000 by Cornelis Boersma. Cornelis Boersma was one, Petros Petlifanoglu and T2 are unique in a way. They joined science, academia. Most of my PhDs, they are bought by industry. Cornelis Boersma, the first worker here, for example, he's now almost, and he's doing very well. He's almost head of GSK in the Netherlands, actually. He's still 35 years old. Okay, let's shift to this topic of HPV vaccination, and you recognize HPV in here. Again, it's also a little bit of a course of Dutch today for you. introducing HPV vaccine. The situation was interesting here in a way that it was both this reference pricing system in the Netherlands that came in and the national immunization program. There were positive recommendations, various countries already in 2006 on the HPV vaccine. The Dutch Health Council, and I was in there by that time, was accused of being very slow. So only in 2009 actually the vaccine was introduced in the Netherlands. Mark Rosenbaum, the first remark on top, published some of these issues in the Open Pharmacoeconomics Journal. Mark Rosenbaum, he's now with Pfizer, also a former PhD with Pfizer now. And the quadrivalent vaccine, the producers, they didn't want to wait for the Health Council, and they thought, let's submit our dossier to the reference pricing system and see how it goes. There's always a two-way analysis, might be similar here, therapeutic part, if that is basically okay, economic part, or actually it's done simultaneously. Of course, the therapeutic part for the HPV vaccine was very positive, added value, of course, but it was denied because of pharmacoeconomics. And again, me and my colleagues could be so proud, because this was the first time that pharmacoeconomics really came in to deny something. You can doubt whether you should be proud of it, because all these girls now have to pay for it themselves or don't take it. But this was unique in a way that this was denied because of pharmacoeconomics, not because of the threshold. As I said, there is no threshold. Actually, at the bottom you can read cost effectiveness was around 20,000 euros per quality, which is, of course, fine. But it was all about the methodology, the duration of protection. Basically, the evidence-based medicine thinkers said, I don't want to see evidence on immunology or even pre-cancerous stages. I want to see evidence on cancer. So basically what they said, come back in 40 years and then you have your data. So the evidence, you often see this, that strong evidence-based medicine thinkers have difficulties in understanding the value of vaccines. That's how I see it. They might say, these non-evidence-based medicine thinkers overestimate the values of vaccines. But that is basically the discussion. And the other thing was intransparent modeling. Of course, that is always important. Your model has to be transparent. You have in the Netherlands to deliver it to the authorities, and they are going to play around with it. And as often with infectious diseases, this was a very complex dynamic model. And even the developers themselves had some difficulties in still understanding the model they made 2 or 3 years ago. So it was a very complex dynamic model. So that was basically this table summarizes, and you can see the red. It's in Dutch, but you can. The rest of my don't worry. The rest of my slides are all in English again. Don't worry. But this is a review of all the decisions made at a certain moment of time. And you see that in red is the row for the human papilloma virus. And what it says is that the cost effectiveness, you might recognize on top of the column, kosteneffectiviteit, which is Dutch for cost effectiveness, insufficient. And basically, what you generally have is insufficient, like here for the Champix, which is against smoking, insufficient on cost effectiveness, but also insufficient on the therapy part. And for HPV, actually, there was this situation of insufficient for cost effectiveness, but meerwaarde, which is Dutch for added value, for the therapeutic part. Generally, both are a problem. Sorry, the other example, Tamiflu, also Tamiflu, the same, not so generally, cost effectiveness insufficient. There's also already something wrong with the therapy. For HPV, this was a unique situation. So here you see how the fourth hurdle worked in the reference pricing system. Since then, we've seen it much more often happening. HPV was the first, but maybe there has to be a first. And after that, I told Petros yesterday evening from the 12 assessments of, from the 12 assessments of drugs last year for the reference pricing system, only one got awarded, and many stumbled on the cost effectiveness part. Actually, this one that was awarded was his last dossier that Petros did in the Netherlands. Okay, lack of hard endpoints is a problem with vaccines. Therefore, modeling is so important. So important for vaccines. You can never do it with the trials alone, and in general, you know, we want to extrapolate from intermediate endpoints to hard endpoints. That also can apply to blood pressure, but certainly to immunogenic parameters. And the time horizon is generally short in trials, so we need the models. Although you could argue long-term effects are discounted away. I want to say some things about discounting and type of model. Start with the discounting, because the Dutch have such a specific approach to the discounting. Together with Belgium, Estonia nowadays, and Switzerland. And of course, some of you are, it's the differential discounting. You all know, I suppose, about discounting. It's about 100 euros now discussion versus 100 euros next year, and basically everybody would prefer to have good things now, bad things later. But if we would agree here that 100 euros now is the same as 104 euros next year, we would have found here in this nice room in Toronto our unique 4% discount rate. Maybe if I would ask you, what about in 2 years? We could already maybe start to see something that is also a discussion which I will touch, that the discount rate might be 4 years from now to the next year, but will it be the same from the next year to the year after that? And there is this discussion on decreasing discounting. And why do we do it? Economic growth is important. That's basically what the Ramsey formulas are, which is actually the basis here. I have them on the slide later on, but I won't bother you too much because many of you are very aware of this, and it might take too long for those not aware to explain it all in detail. Economic growth and uncertainty. There's also this issue, if I would offer you 100 euros now, or I would say, do you want it now or next year? You think, this Professor Postma, I've seen him maybe already at 11 at our previous meeting, but still I only know him shortly, and I don't know if I can trust him. So there's also this type of uncertainty. Will he give me this 100 euros next year? Let's take it now. I'm sure then about it. And we don't do it only to money, but also to life years and quality. It is all about the decreasing marginal utility of the euro, but maybe I should skip these things. We can. It's basically a bit of microeconomics. It is crucial, as you know, as you understand, and this is a very easy example. Pneumococcal vaccination. We save babies for pneumococcal deaths, and you gain 80 life years. We used to discount against 4% in the Netherlands, life years. Money, quality, and if we would discount 80 life years in a row that we gain for this child, and we discount it against this 4%, only 20 remains. So the cost effectiveness ratio goes 4 times, increases 4 times. So you see, and this is in particular true for vaccines, that it is so it's not surprising that some of the manufacturers in the Netherlands of vaccines started this, and I always prefer to have projects with various, not with one manufacturer, but if I do with more than one, with a group of manufacturers. And this group of manufacturers financed a project of mine where we looked into differential discounting, and it was not. These were indeed the manufacturers of the vaccines who wanted to. The project basically was inspired by these kind of. This is work by Tjalke Westra, one of my PhD. He went to GSK, where you can see the polygains for a human papilloma virus, and the black part is the most impressive part, and it's related to to dying, to mortality due to cervical cancer. And you see how crucially the discount rate affects the benefits. Even if you take the 1.5% in the upper right corner, it is still quite a change compared to a discount rate of 0%. And actually, the 1.5% is what we use at the moment in the Netherlands. Still, it's a 1/3. It goes down to 1/3, basically. Yeah, a bit more still on discounting, but first, maybe Petros would say also a typical Postma slide. And jokes generally work less well when you explain them, but here I have to explain because it's in Dutch. So these are two famous Dutch cartoon figures. It's on the left. It is Dirk Jan, regular Dutch name, and here he is the Pope. And on the right is Bert, very common Dutch name, and here he is Michelangelo. And then the Pope says to Michelangelo, when we ask you to paint the 16th chapel in Rome, Mr. Michelangelo, we merely meant you to just whitewash the ceiling. Just paint it white like here. And then Mr. Michelangelo says, wow, bad luck. That's the Dutch humor, so you get a flavor of it. I must say you are much more responsive than when I gave this joke in Germany. But then again, the Germans are famous last week. Then again, the Germans are famous for not having any humor. But that's maybe again the Dutch prejudice. So these are these Ramsey formulas that I mentioned before. The Ramsey formulas, the discount rate for money and for health, and it's the row part is the pure time preference related to this uncertainty, what I explained, that you might not trust me whether I give you it next year. And the other part is related to GM and GH, which are basically growth rates of economy, GM, money, and growth rates of health. And we have these elasticity factors who play a role in these formulas. And basically what you could do is try to estimate your rho and your epsilons and your growth rates for a specific country, and your Ramsey formulas would give you your discount rates. And why would these formulas both end up with the same rates? That would be very coincidental, I would say. Still, almost all countries, as I said, except the Netherlands, Belgium, Estonia, Switzerland, have equal discount. And of course, there are arguments for it, but we thought, okay, we fill out the Ramsey formulas. This was nice. This is the Netherlands. And until 2004, we had 4%, 4%. And when we filled in the Ramsey formulas, you can see it on top. We thought, no, maybe better. Money, yeah, 4%, not so bad. Health, 1.5%. So we have this differential discounting, which is so good for cost effectiveness of vaccines. And we tried to convince other countries. We succeeded with the Belgium, as I said. We also tried to convince NICE. And actually, NICE has discussions again nowadays on whether maybe they should go back to differential discounting. What does empirical data learn us? And Petros is already getting nervous. You're the last point on this slide. But let's start about it. Differential is an issue. Other things, I mentioned it before, a decreasing rate. The farther we are looking to the future, maybe the lower or higher, but generally lower, the discount rate could be. Maybe we should apply some kind of function, like a hyperbolic function, rather than saying discount rate is stable all the time in the future. It might actually go down. We know also from previous empirical studies that in a way they don't learn us anything. They always come up with discount rates in the order of magnitude like 10%. So far off from what guidelines tell us. Various characteristics may influence the results, like what is the age of people, males, females, etc., etc. We started off with a questionnaire that we piloted among pharmacy students. And actually, When we piloted this, Petros, as a very critical PhD student and always very active, said, Maarten, can I have a look at those data? I saw a glimpse and I don't know. So Petros went through all those data, and indeed he took out some crucial elements. There were some data entry issues. There was certainly not fraud. But there were some mistakes. Petros was very important in doing this and in making the questionnaire perfect, which this was piloted on pharmacy students, and then we did it on a large sample of the Dutch population. This is one example of such if you would choose between 30,000 1 year from now, 30,000 5 years, what would you choose? And then you can fine-tune it until you find the same number. So this is one example of a huge questionnaire, piloted first among pharmacy students, and Petros was a bit avant, how do you say, avant la lettre. Nowadays, we have always, in the Netherlands, very important to have a second evaluator of any type of research. You're not allowed to do your data entry alone. There has to be someone else who checks it all. Petros already did this before this Diederik Stapel affair. And I don't know if anyone knows him. No, he's famous maybe even in Europe, but certainly in the Netherlands. And after this affair, everything became much more strict in academia in the Netherlands. He was and he wrote a book on it. So he is not ashamed of it at all. And he is ashamed, but he wrote a book on it himself. At a certain moment, this professor had this empirical research done, and he describes it very nicely in his book. Only if one person would have said yes instead of no in his huge sample, results would be statistically significant. And then he couldn't sleep for days. And he thought, but this person said no. But I think actually if I look at all these other questions, he should have said yes. Maybe he made a mistake and I should change it maybe. No, I shouldn't. And then he didn't sleep for a night again. And then you know how. And then in the end he made it. He changed it and published this. And then after a while he thought, why bother with all these questionnaires, with all these. I mean, I can fill out these. Now, yeah. And this came. He lost his PhD title. He was a dean of a university. He lost everything. He wrote a book. Maybe he made nice money on it actually. But it changed academia in the Netherlands, and it changed academia into a direction that Petros already introduced before that in our room. These were the results: differential time preference for money and quality of life. I said, and Petros was gone, and Petros is also very. I offered him co-authorship, but he said, no, I'm gone now, and this is not. I didn't contribute enough. You see the trends. The trends are important. You see the difference between the money and quality. So clearly, and you also see the downward trend. So basically, this was published in Pharmacoeconomics. You see the rationale for differential discounting as well as decreasing discounting. And this is some issues about were people optimistic or pessimistic, had they had a high quality of life or low quality of life, and how does it influence our results. And this was work by Miraj Paruti. So what is the situation? 4 countries worldwide do differential discounting. These are generally also the countries who at the moment would consider to do a decreasing trend. So equal, constant, vast majority does that. Equal and decreasing, you wouldn't see that. Some countries do differential, but still constant, and some countries would now be thinking of doing differential and decreasing. Type of model. I said it many times for vaccines. This is important. This is a PhD work by Robin de Vries. He joined Roche. All these PhDs they bought away from either by THETA or by industry. The issue here is: do we need a dynamic model or a static model? Dynamic models You take the spread of disease, infectious disease into account. That's a static model you would do not. For example, you don't always need, and our focus was infectious diseases, you don't always need, let's get rid of this thesis, don't always need a static model even with infectious diseases. If you look at hepatitis A in travelers, it's a small group that likely not influences the whole population, the spread, so we can still do a static model. Static model has constant force of infection. It has no herd immunity effects, effects on the unvaccinated. And for modelers, and this was also the lesson from the HPV file, if you make it very complex, the authorities generally, or they might not understand. The authorities are actually more positive generally about simple models. Of course, your model has to grasp all the essentials. So if it cannot be simple, and static models were, for example, in the Netherlands used for rotavirus, cocooning in pertussis, and also initially in pneumococcal. We recently published a dynamic model for in +1 for pneumococcal vaccines. And this is, for example, maternal vaccine immunization, and this is Tjalke Westra, GSK. He used a static model. So that might work very well. But sometimes you need a more complex dynamic model. Herd immunity is important, but do realize there are other effects. An age shift is something that you incur with if you vaccinate, your average age of infection will shift higher up. Serotype replacement is an issue with pneumococcal vaccines. So there are dynamic issues even beyond herd immunity alone. And herd immunity is the fact that unvaccinated people are protected because their environment is protected. Age shift, we know it from varicella zoster virus and for pertussis. Yesterday we discussed, how do you do this? Yesterday evening already, with some wine on the table. How do you do this? These formulas are not so complex in a way. It's always about these differential equations. And when I was doing maths, you had to solve differential equations. Nowadays, you don't even have to solve them anymore. You just you have simulation software, which basically does all the analyses for you. It's always about susceptible, infected, and recovered. It can be, and it is a SIR model. This is an example of an SIS model: susceptible, infected, susceptible. And you see the basic formula. That I won't go into detail, but they're always the same. And even if you think, I don't like the formula, you can also draw these boxes, susceptibles, infected, and you put them in Model Maker, and Model Maker will actually make the formulas for you. So also there, many things are made much easier. This is Mark Rosenbaum, his model for pertussis, and this was the issue in the Netherlands. Should we vaccinate adolescents against pertussis to protect those very young children who are too young to be vaccinated? Newborns of 0 months, 1 month, 2 months. You recognize the boxes with susceptibles and infected, but again, I won't go into details. We did the analysis of booster strategies, let's say, so basically vaccinate adolescents, and we tried to look, does this have any influence on the very small infants? Overall, when you look at the dotted line, which is no booster, versus the red line, which is one of the options of boostering, you do see that the incidence goes down, of course. If we break down these analyses into primary infections, which actually are these very young children who are at high risk of even dying of pertussis, we see that there is not so much going on. So our model learned us, and the Health Council also after this discarded this idea. Of course, it's nice to vaccinate adolescents against pertussis. It gives less disease in adolescents, but you won't protect the very young children. And this is also logical. If you think in terms, it's always about contact matrices. And of course, 12-year-olds and babies, generally, they are not in one family. So we could have also thought of this before. And that is, of course, good that you find something which is intuitively also not strange. There was this other effect. Here you see indirect costs. We have to do the societal perspective in the Netherlands, so we looked at indirect costs. And basically what you see here is that indirect costs, the positives are positive, so positive figures mean decreases in indirect costs, and the negatives are negative increases in indirect costs. And you see basically what I talked about before, this age shift. We shift, if we vaccinate adolescents, we shift the epidemic, and you have more indirect costs in elderly groups, where also salaries are higher. So this was a byproduct, let's say, of our model, which was, I think, also published in PLOS ONE. I'm an editor there, so that helps sometimes. A dynamic model for HPV. Low uptake in the Netherlands, only 50% uptake. Any static model would find corresponding decreases in the subtypes that are included in the vaccine, which are 16 and 18, the blue line and the red line. Any static model would find maximum 50% decreases corresponding to a 50% coverage. Because we use this dynamic model, and we see that also unvaccinated girls are protected, and half of the girls in the Netherlands don't take the vaccine, but some of them are protected indirectly because the others take the vaccine. They don't transmit to boys, and these boys don't transmit to them. So we actually see decreases in HPV prevalence beyond the 50% coverage, which is also, and this you can of course only find 63% decrease, 82% decrease with dynamic models. Some more, and the discounting again. Maybe I should go to this one. Current issues in vaccines in the Netherlands. Pertussis for pregnant women. UK already does it. Mumps revaccinate. A lot of mumps outbreaks among students, university students. Meningococcal B vaccine just became available. Meningococcal C vaccine revaccination, so the vaccine is given at birth or shortly after. But maybe we should vaccinate again at 12, because the efficacy goes down, effectiveness goes down. Rotavirus still not reimbursed in the Netherlands. And influenza, QIV versus TIV, quadrivalent influenza vaccine versus trivalent influenza vaccine. And should we maybe vaccinate children, who are the most important transmitters, and in that way indirectly protect the elderly who do not take the vaccine, which is like 40% of elderly do not take the vaccine. They're offered, but they don't take it. I know my mother doesn't always take it now. It all started actually with, and it's a pity she's not here, but I would have, if I would have known she would not be here, I would also have put this slide in my slide set. The whole influenza analysis and dynamic model started with Beate Sander, her project together with me and a group from Seattle, Ira Longini in particular, and we looked basically then at pandemic vaccine. The core parameter in these dynamic models is the R0. And R0, as you can see, is defined as the average number of secondary infections produced by a typical infected person in a susceptible population. Of course, the higher the R0 is, the more infectious the virus or bacterium is. And for several options were analyzed. Influenza, we know it's around 2.0, maybe more 1.5 or 2.6. We came up with a lot of strategies, full antiviral prophylaxis, or school closure, or pre-vaccination with a vaccine that doesn't fully fit. You see actually the nice thing about dominance and extended dominance. You see a lot of dots, but in the end, the efficacy frontier is very limited, and only actually 3 options remained after exclusion for dominance and extended dominance. But the basic message, Beate Sander started in my group actually this interest and we continue this interest now in influenza. We have this project going on, and I need a few more minutes, and then I will close up. I mentioned before the contact matrix, and this is an example of the contact matrix, the who acquired infection from whom. And this is important, of course, if you want to vaccinate children, to protect elderly. It would be good if there is a lot of contact between them, otherwise you don't have to vaccinate these children. And this, of course, depends. This differs per country. So there are European projects where we assess these who acquired infection from whom matrices for different countries in the EU. And this is work of, in particular, Richard Pittman, and basically together with Richard, we are now repeating this research that he did in the UK. We are repeating this research of vaccinating children to protect the elderly, and he did it in England and Wales, as you see, and now we do it for the Netherlands. Typical dynamic model, SIR, you see the susceptible, infectious and recovered, and there's an in-between group here, but basically think of the differential equations. And here you can find in his table the cost effectiveness, which looks very well, as you can see. Some options dominated, some cost saving, and those who are not dominated, incremental cost per quality is ridiculously low, you might say. Now, yeah, it is also about, and that you often see, but you often have this issue in dynamic models. You have to go on until sort of steady state has been achieved. That is often what mathematical modelers want, and this can take a long time. Hepatitis B in the Netherlands, then it was 100 years. Here it's even 200 years. You might say, now, how is? But still, if you look at this picture already after 25 years, also, if you would put a time horizon there, it's also already below 1,000 euros per or pounds per quality. This is work by de Boer, Peter de Boer, one of the new PhDs, together with Christian Dol, new PhDs on dynamic models. This is quadrivalent influenza vaccine versus trivalent influenza vaccine in the US. And you can see the blue dots in a PSA. So it's a comparison of these two. And sometimes even you see from the blue dots that quadrivalent vaccine, which is €8 more expensive, is cost saving. And this is from the societal perspective. If you would take a third-party payer perspective, the red dots, it looks very cost effective, but at the willingness to pay, as I advocated before from the British Medical Journal, 50,000. But then again, it doesn't matter. This is for the US. So, but the core message here, and I want to say some last words about that, the societal perspective, which is also typical for the Netherlands. The societal perspective, we are sort of forced by Dutch NICE to always take that. And if you don't include production losses in your file, they would basically discard the file because of that. And there is more. There is, of course, inclusion of indirect costs and benefits. But there's also then the issue, it's from the pure societal perspective. What qualities measured by patients, they don't matter. We want to know the societal preferences. What about qualities of caregivers? And in the next slide, I have this example for Belgium. And they, for example, in their rotavirus, and this report was in English, rotavirus vaccine, they looked at the option of including qualities of 2 caregivers. And it makes sense from a societal perspective. It's not only qualities of the patient, but there's people around him or her. Usually cost effectiveness improves if you include indirect costs. It was very important when we lowered the age for influenza vaccination to groups of persons who are still working, 50 to 65. And of course, we always have the issue raised by the Gold Book a long time ago of double counting. If production losses are already in the mind of people when you measure the qualities, and you do them again in the money side, it is an issue. It certainly is. Okay. 2 last slides to summarize the issue. I hope I could, but it's typical Dutch, so it's always difficult, a bit a challenge to convey it, but we have for vaccines the National Immunization Program and the reference pricing system, which both are relevant. We have our issues on discounting. Of course, you should do it, but should we do it differential or not? We do it in the Netherlands. Should it maybe be decreasing? Dynamic models are important for infectious diseases, although we should keep it as simple as possible. Sometimes for infectious diseases, often it is required to do it more complex. If you look at pharmacoeconomics of vaccinology, you need a strong backing in epidemiology, which is in my case Professor Ilko Hak in my unit, and you would actually you need a strong basis in mathematical modeling, and Richard Pittman is at the moment involved, as well as Jacob Wallinga, who are both mathematicians, mathematical biologists by background. Coming years, we are exporting these models that we often start to make for the Netherlands. Hong An started to export some of the Hep B models, for example, that we had to apply it to Vietnam. At the moment, I have 3 Indonesians, more are coming actually, who basically work on the things that we did for the Netherlands, applying it to their country. Dynamic models, we're working influenza models. There are issues about outbreaks in the Netherlands, for example, the mumps that I mentioned. We are building models for that as well. And the new HPV vaccines come that are efficacious against more serotypes, and also more and more evidence that they're efficacious against other types of cancer. So this will be work for the coming years, certainly. And then not for the coming years, but for the coming week. Vaccines is only one area. My colleagues will be here next week, Job van Boven, Jelena Stefanovic, Jovan Michailovic, and they will tell about pharmaceutical care and cost effectiveness, cardiovascular and oncology and cost effectiveness. And actually those last 2 are both co-supervised by Petros Petrivar. Okay, I hope I could explain a little bit the situation that we have at the moment in the Netherlands. Thank you very much for your attention. Hardly any time left, of course.
Curious about whether there are any recommendations or guidance for how to handle that for children with minor student as well as children who have certain evaluations while they're or as adults. And it's discounted heavily that program to realize and then more value on children in schools or children being away from their work. How do we value productivity of children, or do you admit a parent? Just curious about the ideas.
So first, sorry that I've been too long and only that I so short time for discussion only. This was a big issue in the rotavirus vaccination. There it is all about small children, and I can only say with you that this is an important area for research. I think there is not enough being done. In the university, my colleague Paul Krabbe is basically the person who is most experienced with quality of life. I think this is an important area. What we generally did for rotavirus is taking the proxy, quality of life proxy from the parent. And I have not seen work where it's estimated to do it differently and for the children. I don't know if I got the question in every detail, but you wonder about the static model and dynamic model in relation to discounting, yeah? Yeah. 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 There is in general this issue that equal discounting in combination with dynamic modeling works, and I hope this is a sort of an answer, works very well with dynamic models. If you do the differential discounting in dynamic models, you see you have to deal with some strange things, like the longer the time horizon is, the more cost-effective your intervention will be because of the difference between the costs discounted and the life years being discounted. So there are some issues to be solved there, but I believe they can be solved. We're actually writing a paper on that one, but I don't know, it might not be exactly the answer to your question, but maybe we can discuss it afterwards more in detail.
I think we have to draw it to a close at this point. I'd really like to thank Professor Postma for coming and giving us a really interesting talk. I certainly learned a lot about what's happening in the continent, about societal perspective of discounting. I'm sure he'd be willing to hang around and entertain additional questions.